I'll decide what we need to do with it. Okay, the first line of defense includes the physical barriers, the chemical barriers, and your genetics. Your physical barriers are like your skin, your nose hair, for example. Your chemical barriers are like your tears, your saliva. Your genetics, those are your genes. The second line of defense include things like familiar things that you may have heard about, like phagocytosis and inflammation, and fever. We all heard about that one. You may have suffered at one time or another in your life with that. But it's actually a good thing. Obviously, it's helping the fever. So those are the two things that we call innate and non-specific. I mean, the way I stress these two words looks like it's on the exam. Innate means you're born with it. It's inborn. It knows how to do things one way. If that can help, I'm good, everything's fine. But if it can't help, then look somewhere else. For example, your skin. Your skin is a barrier. It protects you. Hey, if that's good, I'm fine. That's all I know I can do. Is that okay? Okay. But once you break it, you need to look somewhere else for help, because that's all the skin can do for you. Your tears do something, and that's it. If that's helpful, that's fine. If not, look somewhere else for help. That's what the word innate means, inborn. You're born with it. See, the problem is that some students don't understand what then acquired means for this one. I'll tell you what that is. Hang in. Non-specific means I can kill one way. I only know how to kill one way. That's it. If that helps, I'm happy. If not, look somewhere else. For example, there's an enzyme called lysozyme. It can destroy the cell wall of bacteria. That's it. If it works for you, good. If not, I can't do anything else. That's all I can do. It's non-specific. So it doesn't target. It doesn't tailor its response. That's the job of this guy, the third line of defense. The third line of defense is specific. It will build a specific line of attack based on who it's fighting. Oh, this is E. coli. Well, let me kill it this way. This is salmonella. Okay, now let me kill it this way. That's the third line of defense. See, you're also born with the third line of defense, of course. But the word acquired means you have the cells, but they have to be exposed to the antigen to go to work. The antigen is the foreign protein. So you have your B cells and your T cells ready to go, but they will not activate until they've been exposed to the antigen. That's the acquired part. You acquire immunity upon exposure to the antigen. This is different than innate. Innate, you have your skin on you all the time, working for you all the time as a barrier between you and the pathogens. So we have to understand the difference between innate and acquired, specific and non-specific. So again, this is chapter 15. We're about to go through these two. So you'll hear some of the things that I just said over again. So let's go more specifically through the first line of defense. Your skin is a first line of defense, and all the secretions from your skin are considered first line of defense mechanisms. Your mucous membranes, like your tears and your saliva. There's an enzyme in your tears and your saliva called lysozyme. And look what it does. It hydrolyzes the peptidoglycan, which is the main component of bacterial cell walls. So every time you blink, you kill bacteria to keep your eye clean, of course, to prevent infections of your eye. But there are people that have what is called dry eye syndrome, where their eyes are constantly dry, itchy, because they're not secreting enough tears. They tend to run a higher risk of an eye infection, which is not something you want. There are some people also that do not produce enough saliva. They tend to have bad breath as a result of that. So you can tell these secretions have things in them to protect you. And they know how to do things one way. That's it. If I can help you out, I'm happy for you. So that's the innate, non-specific part of the first line of defense. Your respiratory tract has nasal hair in your nose and the mucus in your nose to help trap pathogens that you might be breathing through the air. The whole idea is to get them trapped in your nose before they get to your lungs. The genitourinary tract, we talked about the vaginal canal having low pH to ward off infections, so the lowering of pH. The antagonism of your resident microbiota, all of those are considered first line of defense. The GI tract, the acid in your stomach, the juices in your intestines, all of those are working to protect you against pathogens. And even your genetics. Now, I talked about a disease not too long ago where 95% of people are automatically immune to it because of their genetics. Which disease is that? Which one of the diseases that we talked to, we said, don't worry, 95% chance you're already genetically protected against it. See? Which?
Botulism?
No. It is extremely disfiguring.
Is it leprosy?
Leprosy. Yeah, it is leprosy. Yeah. And that's an example of that. Now, these guys here, the in-class exercises, you're doing as homework. We will not do it right now. I'm going to keep moving. And they are due on Tuesday. All right, so I'm going to do this, move forward through my slides so you can have a chance to practice them and try them at home. All the in-class exercises for this chapter will be due on Tuesday because we'll wrap it up on Tuesday. The immunology is the study of the immune system. And believe me when I tell you this, you already know the information on this line. I hope you know that your immune system keeps you healthy because number one, it looks for the bad guy. Do you agree with me? Number two, when it finds the bad guy, you want it to identify it as a bad guy. Recognize, oh, that's the bad guy. Number three, you want it to kill the bad guy. And that's what it does. Your immune system's job is to surveil your body, recognize that that's a pathogen, and destroy the pathogen. And if your immune system is doing those things, we call you immune competent, which means you're good, you're healthy, your immune system is healthy. The interesting thing is, how does your immune system know you from the bacteria? It is amazing. How does it distinguish between you, the hosts, and the bad guy, bacteria? Well, on the surface of your cells, on the surface of most of your cells, with the exception of the red blood cell, we're not going to worry about that. But on the surface of most of your cells, you have a receptor. It is called the major histocompatibility complex 1. Say that 10 times, right? It's MHC1. Is there an MHC2? Yeah, there's even a 3. But we'll talk about them later. The major histocompatibility complex 1 is on the surface of all of your cells. This is like your social security number. I hope you are the only one in this world that has that number because it identifies you. Well, that's like your social security number, and that's what your white blood cells identifies you for who you are. Oh, this is Dr. Saad, don't touch it. So all my cells have my MHC1. All your cells have your MHC1. And my white blood cells will recognize that that's Dr. Saad because it's looking at the MHC1. And if it finds it, it says, hands off, we're not gonna hurt this guy because he's the host. The interesting thing is, that's how the immune system recognizes the bacteria. Why? Because it doesn't have MHC1. So the bacterial cell does not have MHC1. So the white blood cell goes around. Do you have MHC1? Yeah. Do you have MHC1? Yeah. That's the host. How about you? No. Uh-oh. You're a foreign object here. You're probably bacteria. You're gonna hurt me. I'm gonna destroy you. So that's how it recognizes it and then goes to work killing it. Now, you'll see later, the bacteria has its own protein on the surface called the PAMP. We'll see that later. And that's another way your white blood cells recognizes this bacteria is bacteria. Number one, it doesn't have MHC1. Number two, it has a PAMP. Oh, it's for sure bacteria. I'm killing it. So we'll see that in another slide real soon. I mean, this is fascinating. Again, when I was a student and I started taking this stuff, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then you want to really be impressed with this? Go ahead, take an immunology class, a whole class on the immune system. You'll be blown away. It's amazing how it works. Again, this becomes home. So now we start talking about something called the components of the immune system. What are the parts? Interestingly, the extracellular fluid around your cells is a component of the immune system because your cells are swimming in that fluid. And technically, this area here is in contact with another area very far away. For example, if I have an infection in my shoulder, my knee knows about it. It's amazing. The reason behind that is the fluids around the cell can send, or the cell can send signals through the fluid to the lymphatic system or to your blood vessels. And it's like, hey, help. So it uses this interconnected network to send and request help. And the help will come through the blood vessels, you see? This is like say you're having an infection here, this cell's gonna say, alarm, help. So it's sending the help message through the system and the help is coming through the system. So if I have a problem here, you can rest assured the rest of my body knows about it. The cells in this area are not gonna work on their own trying to fight the bacteria. They're gonna try to do it on their own, and now if they get to a point where I think I need help, they're gonna send signals, they're gonna ask for help. Well, because of the fluids are basically gateways between your lymphatic vessels and your blood vessels, that technically this cell is connected to the rest of your body. So the extracellular fluid becomes part of a component of your immune system. Then there's another thing. The cells that live, the white blood cells that are resident in your tissue. There are white blood cells that live among your other cells. And they just stay there. It's like having a fire extinguisher in the lab. We don't use it every day, thank God, but it's there in case we need it. That's the same thing. We have a white blood cell sitting in our tissue waiting for work, an infection. And if it needs help, it's gonna send a signal through the blood vessels, lymphatic system, and so on. So these are phagocytes. These white blood cells that live in your tissue, they are professionals at phagocytosis. I mean, all cells can phagocytose. But just these guys are just experts at it. They phagocytose bacteria to kill them. So that's their job. That's what they're there for. They sit there waiting. If you need me to get up and help you, I'll phagocytose the bacteria and kill it. So collectively, those are called the mononuclear phagocyte system. So that's another component of your immune system. A third component is your lymphatic system itself, the lymphatic vessels, and all the lymphoid organs associated with the lymphatic vessels. The lymphatic vessels have an interesting job. If you look at the blood, the vasculature system, the arteries and the veins, you can overlay them on top of each other almost. Everywhere you have an artery or a vein, most likely you have a nearby vessel, lymphatic vessel. There's a reason behind that. The vasculature, when the blood vessels are doing their job, which is delivering oxygen to working tissue, it's inevitable. They're going to lose some fluids. They can't avoid that. So as I'm walking, I drop a couple of pieces of paper. That's just me, right? And every time I go walking, I lose some things, but that's just me. So it's the same thing with the blood vessels. Every time I go to deliver oxygen, I will lose some fluids. What happens then is something says, well, you better pick them up. Because the blood vessels keep losing fluids, if you don't pick up the fluid, you're gonna swell like a balloon on the bottom. Your fluids are gonna feel the force of gravity, and you're gonna be swollen like this big. Well, we don't do that. It's because we have the lymphatic vessels. The lymphatic vessels basically work as vacuum cleaners of the lost fluid. The fluid that is lost by your vasculature is picked up by your lymphatic vessels. It's like a little tiny vacuum cleaner picking up all the lost fluid. And look what they do with it. All the lost fluid goes back, all the way back, and enters back into your cardiovascular system through here. So you're not losing anything. So you might be losing it temporarily, but it goes back into your vasculature. So technically, you're not losing anything. It's sort of like you dropping some water on the floor and somebody picks it up and puts it back in the container. Then that means you didn't lose anything. Now, there are some people that have things like blocks in the lymphatic vessels, and those are, of course, diseases, and then you can start swelling up as a result of that because the fluids is not moving back to the heart. All the fluids picked up by the lymphatic vessels, once it enters the lymphatic vessel, it is now called lymph. So all the picked up fluids, once it enters the lymphatic vessels, is now called lymph. And your lymphatic vessels do this, might as well filter it. I picked it up, might as well filter it before I dump it back. And that's why we have lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes all over the place, but there are areas where they're more concentrated than others, like in the neck, back behind the ears, under the armpits, in the pelvic area. Those are areas where they're more concentrated, but you have lymph all over the place. And that's what they are designed to do. They are designed to filter the lymph before it gets dumped back into your vasculature. So what is it filtering? It's going to filter things like bacteria, if it happens to capture one. It's going to filter things like viruses. Oh, they're really helping you, those lymph nodes. They also filter cancer cells. So I mean, think about it. These lymph nodes are protecting you from cancer by simply filtering the lymph. They pick up anything that is bad, and then they do this. I got one. Then they start saying, alarm, 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 come and help us. And usually what happens is your lymph node swells, it causes a little bit of pain. Hopefully it's temporary until the problem is resolved and you're fine again. So if you do have a swollen lymph node in the near future, whatever, know that your lymphatic system is working for you. doing its job. Now you might want to help it with antibiotics and all that, but let's say, God forbid, you get a lymph node that's swollen that just never goes away. Now that one is a different problem. That's a lymph node that probably caught a cancer cell and it just could not get rid of it for whatever reason. And the cancer cell decided to multiply inside the lymph node. Then you have now a lymphoma. So you gotta watch out for those things, of course. The other things associated with lymphoid organs or tissue there is our thymus. I said thymus, I did not say thyroid. Thyroid is something else. Thyroid is a gland that sits in your neck. It looks like a butterfly, and it's involved in your metabolism through the release of thyroid hormone. A thymus is something else. It actually sits on right underneath your rib cage here, right over your heart right here. If you try to find mine, you're not gonna find it. Not because somebody took it out, it's because I'm too old. What we know about the thymus is that it atrophies over time as you age. So when you're young, 5, 6, 7 years old, it's there doing its job, and we'll talk about what its job is later. But by the time you're my age, it's gone. Good luck finding it. So that's a comment. It doesn't mean that I'm sick or anything like that. It just, that's the way it works here. We talked about lymph nodes. Your spleen is another thing. Your spleen functions to, all your blood goes through your spleen, again, as a filter. One of its key jobs is to filter out weird looking blood, red blood cells. Old red blood cells, and starts recycling them and stuff. Now, the galt, the malt, the salt, and the bolt, you'll hear more about in nursing school. But this is like lymphoid tissue associated with a certain part in your body, like your gut. So the galt is gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So when you get a CT of the abdomen, the radiologist is going to be looking for any evidence of lymph nodes inflamed inside your abdomen, which gives them clues of what's going on, of course. Then all you have to do is change the first letter to tell you where you're looking. The malt would be the mucosa. Those are the tissue that causes or produce secretions for you, like saliva and tears and all that. The salt, the S is for the skin. The bolt is bronchial, which is lung. The other component of the immune system, I'm sure you know this, is your blood itself. Interestingly, the blood has two components, a liquid component and a cellular component. When you take whole blood, unclotted whole blood, put it in a tube and centrifuge it, means spin it really fast. It's a machine that we have in the lab. It will separate. The liquid, the lighter liquid will stay on top, the heavier cells will settle to the bottom. Well, what we notice is that most of your cellular part of your blood are red blood cells. Most of them are red blood cells. So this area here is your red blood cells. The buffy coat are your white blood cells. So most of it is red blood cells for the cellular part. Why is this useful? A doctor can actually order this test to be done on you. It's called the hematocrit. And you'll learn it later, if not learned it in A&P yet. But the hematocrit tells you what's the percent that is red blood cells compared to everything else. So for example, 40% red blood cells, that would be good. You're okay. 15% red blood cells, oh, you got anemia. See, if you have anemia, that means low levels of red blood cells. That's going to show on the hematocrit because this will be this high, not this high. Quick test, you got anemia, but now which anemia? Now the fun begins. The doctor has to figure out which anemia because there's so many different kinds of anemia. So I'm just showing you one quick use of that kind of test. Now, another thing that we can do is take your blood, leave it on the countertop for a little bit, let it clot on purpose. Did you know? As soon as your blood stops moving, it starts clotting. Did you know that? Well, now you do. That's why you have to have a nice working heart for you that beats for a long time. Because every time it beats, it keeps your blood moving. If you get a weak heart, if you start having a weak heart where it's not squeezing all of the blood out of it, that means some of the blood is not moving inside your heart. It's not emptying all the way. That means it's gonna clot. Now, unlucky for you, the next time it beats, what is it sending out? Not the blood, the clot. And it's at the point where it's you and your luck at that point. Usually causes a heart attack. If it goes through, it may also cause a stroke and all those. So that's the danger of having a weak heart. If it's not emptying all the way, the blood stagnates and starts clotting on you. Now you're on a high risk of heart attacks and strokes and stuff. So you want your blood to be moving all the time to keep it from clotting. But we would take some of it on purpose, leave it out, let it clot, and then spin it. So what's now the difference between the liquid part? The difference here is this one has everything in it. It has water in it. It has hormones in it. It has sodium in it. It has sugar in it, your food, right? It has oxygen or carbon dioxide. It has waste products, everything. Because it's the transport vehicle. See, when your thyroid secretes thyroid hormone, it's going to throw it in the blood for transport. Why? Because all your cells need thyroid hormone. Your thyroid gland makes it and throws it in the blood for distribution. Oxygen, you breathe it. But then all your cells need oxygen, so you deliver the oxygen through the blood, specifically the red blood cells. And then while they're there, they pick up the waste, CO2, to get rid of it. Waste products will reach your kidney by your cells throwing them in the blood first, and then the blood takes it to your kidney so you can excrete them. I mean, your blood is a delivery mechanism. So it's got everything in there, hormones, antibodies, in the plasma, water, calcium, sodium, everything. So it's also got clotting factor, this one, clotting factors. So what we're doing is we're on purpose removing the clotting factors. Because after you spin it now, you don't have plasma, you have serum as the liquid component. What happened to the clotting factors? They're now in the clot. So the main difference between serum and plasma, when you hear that later, is that serum does not have clotting factors. But it has everything else. It's got the hormones and the calcium and the sodium and the waste products and the nutrients and the oxygen. It's got everything else. The water, mostly water, a lot of water in both of them. 92% water. But the plasma has the clotting factors. So these are the components of the liquid part. The plasma, when we're talking about serum, you're not going to have these guys. The clotting factor. See the difference between the two? What about the cellular components? The cellular components include the erythrocytes. You'll see that on the next slide, the red blood cells, erythrocytes. The thrombocytes, the platelets, you'll see that also on the next slide. And all of the leukocytes, the white blood cells, you'll also see that on the next slide. The question is, where do these blood cells develop? It's in the bone marrow. There's tissue inside your long bones called the bone marrow, and that's where these guys develop. And the process of making these blood cells is called hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis is the process by which your bone marrow makes these blood cells. And I'm talking about all the blood cells. So you need a healthy bone marrow for the rest of your life, because you have to always replenish them. So in your bone marrow, there is a stem cell. Forgot my pointer today, but there's a stem cell, this guy right here, called the hematopoietic stem cell, because of its, see, get it? It's hematopoiesis, the hematopoietic stem cell. This stem cell will differentiate into two lineages. So I am the hematopoietic stem cell. I'm going to differentiate into two lineages. One lineage, this one, is called the myeloid. This one is called the lymphoid. You'll see it on the next slide. Well, actually, let me show you so you can write them down. Myeloid, lymphoid. Now, I always tell you guys this, short list, long list. I will remember the short list, everything else is on the long list. Remember me saying that before? Mm-hmm. The short list is the lymphoid. T cells, B cells, natural killer cells are lymphoid lineage cells. That's it. TB and the natural killer cells. And the T and the B cells are lymphocytes. So the lymphocytes and the natural killer cells are lymphoid lineage cells. That's it. Everything else is on the other side, myeloid. So I didn't say monocytes is a lymphoid, so that means monocytes is a myeloid. Because it's not a T, a B, or a natural killer cell. Are we catching that? T, B cell, T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells are lymphoid. Anything other name I hear is myeloid. Red blood cells, myeloid. Platelets, myeloid. Eosinophils, myeloid, and so forth. Now if we go back to that slide, you'll see what I'm talking about. All of these are myeloid, including these guys. Myeloid, these are the lymphoid. The T cells, the B cells, and the cool guys, natural killer cells. Now we learned or talked about what red blood cells do. They carry oxygen to your tissue and they pick up the waste CO2. That's easy, a little bit of physiology here. The platelets are involved in clotting, so they help you heal when you cut yourself. These guys that you're about to see here, one of the things they're very good at, a lot of them are, is phagocytosis. Now when we're talking about these, the leukocytes, we're talking about phagocytosis of bacteria, because we want them to kill bacteria. Can they phagocytose a protein for nutrition? All cells can do that. But we're talking about phagocytosis to fight bacteria. Neutrophils phagocytose to kill bacteria. Your monocytes phagocytose to kill bacteria. Macrophages, dendritic cells. And some of them are professionals at it. And the other thing is, some of them are located in one spot, but not another. For example, the monocytes. The monocytes reside in your blood. If they do leave your blood, they're no longer monocytes. They change and they become macrophages. So they're monocytes as long as they're in your blood, circulating. But once they decide, I think I'm going to go in the tissue and do some things here, then they become macrophages. You may have had a doctor ask for you to go and get a CBC done, which is called a complete blood count. What the doctor is trying to do is figure out how many of these do you have, and how many of these do you have, and how many of these, and then what's the ratio, and all that. Because they can get information from that. For example, if your eosinophil numbers go up, that's an indication to the doctor that you have an infection, either worm or fungal infection. So if your eosinophils are fine, they're looking somewhere else. Maybe it's bacterial, maybe it's viral, I don't know. But once they realize that your eosinophils are much higher than expected, the indication here is that you might be either fungally infected or have a worm infestation. And most likely be fungal, because infestation is rare, see? So they go based on what's the chance of you having a worm? And so they're very good at figuring those things out. The basophils are involved in inflammation. If you suffer from allergies, you're going to blame the mast cells. Some people are born with mast cells that have receptors that bind to common allergens like pollen from flowers, dust, egg products, and stuff like that. So if you happen to have one of these mast cells, you're gonna realize that you're allergic to eggs or allergic to pollen, and you suffer the consequence of the mast cell being activated by the allergen. Watery eyes and itchy nose and all those things. Now, the T cells and the B cells do something different. These guys are professionals at what they do. Watch what the T cells and the B cells will do. The T cells and the B cells will hang around looking at the first line of defense saying, can you do it on your own skin? What about you, lysozyme? How about you, mucus? Can you do it on your own? Do you need me to get up and help you? No, let us try, okay. Now, once you cut yourself, that means your skin failed you, right? We gotta take in some of the stuff that we talked about in chapter 13. Once you cut yourself, what did the bacteria gain? Entry. Because your first line of defense failed you. You see how we can bring it all together? And then what happens is the first line of defense says, okay, I failed. How about you, second line? How about you, phagocytosis? Can you help us? And the fever that we're going to talk about, and the inflammation that we're going to talk about. Can you guys help? We don't want to wake up the big guys, the T cells and the B cells. We'll only wake up the T and the B cells when we really need the help. So the T cells and the B cells are main players here. They will get up and do the work when all else fails you, when everything else fails you. Your skin, your mucus, your lysozyme from your tears, your phagocytosis, and then the other things that we'll talk about, the complement system, the inflammation. All right, I need to go to work. These guys are not getting it done. Now, once they get up and do the work, oh, good luck to that bacteria. Yes, go ahead.
So are the T cells, that's what's compromised with HIV?
Yeah, a specific type of T cell is what's attacked by HIV, yeah. Now the T cells, one of their main jobs, besides regulating the immune system, the T cell, there's a special T cell called the T helper cell. It's the boss of the immune system, and that's what HIV attacks. It knocks it out because of it, because the T cell is the boss, and you're getting rid of the boss. That's why you might have the players, but they don't know what to do. That's immune compromise as a result of an HIV infection. But one of the most important things that T cells do is that they identify a virally infected cell and they kill it. So some of your cells might become virally infected. They recognize that that cell is no good anymore. It has a virus in it. And it attacks your cells. Well, you don't need them anyways because they're virally infected. The other awesome thing that T cells do is they recognize cancer cells. Look at how they do that one. A lot of cancers, see, this is your cell. If it, God forbid, it becomes a cancer, one of the things it turns off is the gene that makes this. Thank God it does that. Because now it will look like this. It will look like a foreign cell. Do you see that? The reason my immune system is not attacking my cell is because this is, hey, this is me. Don't touch me. This is host. Now, if this cell becomes a cancer, at least in some cases, it, for whatever reason, decides I'm not going to make MHC1 anymore, then it will look like this. The immune system, the T cell, will say, what is that? I don't think it's the host. I don't know what that is. Let me kill it. Well, that's a good thing now, because that's actually a cancer for you. So luckily, they stop making MHC1, the immune system no longer recognizes it as host, which is good now because that's cancer, and kills it. It's awesome how that works. We have a backup system to the T cells when it comes to viral infections and killing cancer. Is these cool guys right here, the natural killer cells. The natural killer cells also kill cells that are virally infected and kill cells that have become cancer, transformed and became cancer. The B cells you'll see in chapter 15, they're involved in the making of antibodies, and we'll see that. So I talked about all of this stuff here. Now we used to do a lab on the blood smear. We would take a blood smear on a slide and look at it using the microscope. And all I got out of it are students that were really frustrated because they couldn't use the microscope properly, they couldn't see the cells properly, they couldn't identify them. I mean, I'm asking students to become a cytologist in like half an hour. You get really frustrated because you can't tell which one is which, so I decided, you know what? Well, I'm not going to do the lab, but we will learn the information in lecture instead. So one of the things that you would have learned in this lab, now you're learning it in lecture, is the abundance of these things. This is something that you really want to remember, because again, you're going into the health sciences field. You need to know that neutrophils are the most abundant white blood cells circulating in your blood vessels right now. The next to that is lymphocytes, then the monocytes and the eosinophils. So, when in doubt, call it a neutrophil. You see what I'm talking about? Because without looking at a microscope, if I put a blood smear and I focus it on a slide and I ask you, what do you think this cell is? You say, neutrophil. You didn't even look at the slide. Say, neutrophil, you'd be almost right. Almost all the time right. Because they're the most abundant. But you'd be foolish to say, basophil, because that's the least abundant. Do you see that? Basophil, when my students used to do this, they would spend like an hour and a half looking for a basophil. I had a student who would not leave the lab until he found one. And then he ended up leaving without finding it. You see, because he had to go to his other class. They're so rare. They're there, but good luck catching one of them, right, on the blood smear. On top of that, you have to be professional at, identifying these cells. He may have seen one. He just didn't know it was a basophil, you see. So, if you took A&P, you know what I'm about to say. There's a mnemonic, and it says, never let monkeys eat bananas. And that tells you the order from most abundant to least abundant. Neutrophil is the most abundant, so that's the never. Next to that is lymphocytes, that's the let, and so forth. So remember the mnemonic because that tells you the order of abundance. From most abundant to least abundant. So I have another mnemonic that you may not have heard of or about in A&P, and that's a Dr. Saad trademark. Never eat bananas. Did anyone hear about that one? Good. So it stays as a Dr. Saad trademark. Never eat bananas are the granulocytes. The cells that have granules. See, some white blood cells have granules in them. Some white blood cells don't. The ones that have granules are your neutrophils, eosinophils, and I almost said bananas, and your basophils. So that's the new mnemonic that reminds you of which ones have the granules. Never eat bananas. So the never let monkeys eat bananas is a mnemonic for the abundance. The never eat bananas is a mnemonic reminding you of who has the granules. Use it. It's free of charge for you guys. How's that? So what we had our students do under a microscope there is look at the white blood cell and figure out which one is it. Well, someone who's experienced with this knows to look for clues. The clue for a neutrophil is the nucleus is multi-lobed. Believe me when I tell you that this purple structure here, that's actually one nucleus with multiple lobes. That's a neutrophil. on top of that, the other thing that recognizes it or identifies it as a neutrophil are the pink granules in the cytoplasm. So when you see one of those under a microscope, which are going to be the most common ones, yeah, that's a neutrophil. The lymphocytes are actually so easy to figure out because most of the lymphocyte is a nucleus. Look at that, very little cytoplasm. That's a lymphocyte. Now, which lymphocyte? The microscope won't tell you that. Because there are B lymphocytes, there are T lymphocytes, and there are different kinds of T cells, and no, the microscope won't tell you that. It'll tell you it's a lymphocyte, but it won't tell you which one specifically. There are other machines for that. The monocyte has a bean-shaped nucleus, looks like a kidney kind of thing. The eosinophils have the purple granules. The basophils will have the deep blue granules. Again, I am not going to test you on this here. I am not going to show you a picture and ask you which white blood cell is this. That was a lab thing that I used to do. But I don't want you leaving this class without at least being exposed to the information. Knowing that, if I ever come in contact with this in the future, I know where to go. I'll go back to my micro stuff and look at it. I only have time to finish this part here. The neutrophils can mature and become what's called a seg. So as the neutrophils mature with time, they gain more lobes in the nucleus and they become and the size is smaller. So they're called segs. So this is a mature neutrophil. This one is a baby neutrophil just born not too long ago. Congratulations. And it is just a joke. All right. You guys are too serious there. All right. That's called a band neutrophil. It has less lobes and it's bigger. Do you see that? Now, why would a doctor worry about that? I told you, every test that they ask you to do, there are clues that they're looking for. Watch this. If you have a current infection, if you're infected right now, remember the alarm, alarm, alarm. The alarm is going to be sent out. Why? Because the old neutrophils are not doing it. So I have an infection here. The old neutrophils went there to fight. And they're like, oh man, I'm getting too old for this. I can't. So the cells are alarm, alarm, send us new ones, send us new ones. The baby ones send new ones. So your bone marrow is gonna start producing new neutrophils, the baby ones. So what this tells the doctor is, if you have a lot of these in your blood, or the ratios between them and stuff, you have an acute infection. You have an infection going on right now. Because if you were okay, you wouldn't need to stimulate your bone marrow to produce new neutrophils right away to fight an infection. So you would have more segs. But once you start producing bands, it's a signal, it's a sign that you might be suffering from an acute infection. So that's another piece of data that the doctor will look at and say, yeah, you have an infection. Let's try to figure out where and what, and go from there.